Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Daniel Page and I'll be doing the masterclass today on self-mastery. So the title is The Art of Self-Mastery, Unlocking Your Full Potential. As I'll be going through the masterclass, please feel free to pop some comments in the comments section. I'll be asking some questions and I'd love to get your engagement as we go through the session. Don't worry, they're anonymous. So really keen to get your engagement there. All right, let's crack on. So if you aren't able to make the whole thing, the recording will also be made available to Tomorrow Trust to see on YouTube on demand and catch up on everything you might have missed at a later stage. So don't stress if your Wi-Fi suddenly stops working or there's a challenge in that regard. Right, so who am I? As I said, I'm Dr. Daniel Page. I am the CEO and founder of Psyche Innovations. My company focuses on making mental health and specifically psychological skills training accessible to as many people as possible. We do that through presentations like these and workshops, as well as the Psyche Mental Health app. I'll show you some details about that app, which you have free access to, which has a wide range of skills on it. And I'll tell you more about my story as we go. Right, so what will we be discussing and covering in this masterclass? So we'll be looking at what is self-mastery. I'll tell you a bit about my story and why I'm doing this work and how developing my self-mastery skills has made an impact on my life. I'll then look at, how you figure out where to start. What does self-mastery journey look like? What are some of the key skills you can learn? And then we'll go into 3 core skills that you can implement today, straight away, that have been transformational for my life and many of the students I've worked with. So I've lectured and trained elite athletes. If any of you are into soccer, I've recently been training the Stellenbosch Football Club and the City of Cape Town Football Club, which has been really cool, teaching them a lot of the skills that you guys are going to be learning today. As well as a wide range of other audiences, from athletes to soldiers to big corporates. Right, so the first sort of big key question really is, what is self-mastery? So in some ways it might be obvious, but in other ways maybe not so much. So self-mastery is really the ability to control your thoughts, emotions, and actions to reach your full potential. So when we talk about psychology and how people's brains work, there's really these 3 core sides to the triangle. And that's your thoughts, your cognitions, it's your emotions, your feelings, and your behaviors. And they're all linked, right? They're not independent. So for example, if you start doing behaviors or actions that promote self-worth and self-mastery, it actually starts building those beliefs in your thoughts through doing it, even if you don't fully believe it yet. Similarly, it works with emotions in the same way. So why does developing self-mastery really matter? And it kind of is obvious, right? These skills are appropriate in university or higher education or college or throughout your educational journey. And then it carries forward into your career. So that's whether you stay in academia and you become a lecturer, or you work in corporates, or you're an elite athlete. These skills of self-mastery are applicable in all these different settings. And then it helps you have more resilience to overcome personal challenges. So all of us will experience our own sort of set of challenges. And these can be things like growing up in difficult circumstances, losing loved ones, having financial stress, having academic stress. These challenges are going to come for all of us. And self-mastery is really about building competencies and skills that help carry us through these difficult times. Then there's emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is your ability to understand your own emotions, your own thoughts, your own behaviors, as well as those of the people around you. And having self-insight, which is one of the skills we'll look into, practicing that on yourself helps you have emotional intelligence for the people around you and understanding their motives and why they're doing things. It's hard to understand others if we haven't done the work of trying to understand ourselves first. Again, if you have any questions as we're going, please pop them in the comments section. You can thumbs up questions that you think are really cool. I'm really happy to answer any questions as we're going through this. The more, the better. Right. So another key aspect is resilience, which connects to self-mastery. So resilience is really your ability to bounce back when adversities come. So for example, I unfortunately lost one of my really good friends to a heart attack recently. It came completely out of the blue. I was at his wedding recently. So he was just starting to like get into this new phase of his life, which was really exciting. And no matter who you are, no matter how tough you are, there are these difficult times that come along. And resilience is really about dipping less low and bouncing back quicker when these tough times come around. Right. Then there's the confidence aspect of self-mastery. So it comes a little bit with self-belief. So self-mastery has elements of self-efficacy in, which is really your belief in your abilities to do something. So for example, Usain Bolt, being an amazing sprinter as he was, and obviously he's still in the athletic space, he believes in his abilities. And he believes in his abilities because he knows he can do what he's doing, right? So there's a close alignment between what he's capable of and his belief in himself. Whereas unhealthy confidence or unhealthy sense of self-worth comes from believing that you can do things that are beyond your capacity. For example, I'm tall, but not particularly fast. So telling myself, oh, I could beat Usain Bolt in a race, or any of the amazing other Olympians or athletes we're seeing out at the moment is unfounded, right? If maybe I trained and I got really good, then as your ability rises, your sense of self-mastery should rise too. So your sense of self-worth and self-mastery is aligned with your ability. And that's how healthy confidence works. It's really cool to see all the comments coming through. Hello, everyone. Greetings. It's good to have you here. Thank you for joining. And then there's the element of discipline. So when we say discipline, we don't mean getting smacked by a ruler because you did something wrong. We mean practices that keep you on track with your goals. So self-mastery is also aligned with that sort of sense of responsibility and that discipline. As you know, being students and in other facets of your life, continually working hard and honing your skills requires discipline. It requires getting up on the rainy days. It requires going for a run when it's cold outside. It means studying late at night and not going to all those parties. And that's a key aspect of discipline that ties into self-mastery. Right. So I'd like to share a little bit about myself and my story before I go into some of the skills. So I really like to practice what I preach. And By that I mean I'm not teaching you skills today that I don't apply in my own life. They have really been transformational for me and in my educational journey. The Big Rocks activity was taught to me by one of my PhD mentors. Self-talk is a skill that's super valuable to me because I really struggle with self-talk and negative self-talk. And mental imagery is also something I try to practice to envision a future for myself that I really want. And that's also a skill I struggle with. So I'm covering skills and concepts that are really important, really effective, really evidence-based, but are also things that I have found super useful in my own journey. So my educational journey was also a little bit weird. I did study for a very long time. I studied molecular biology at Stellenbosch. I actually didn't really enjoy my degree. I ended up failing physics and chemistry and mathematics in my first year. I honestly thought it was the end of the world. And it also meant that I would take longer with my studies. So when I was in my fourth year, having to make up some of the subjects that I had failed, I was seeing my peers progress, and that really got to me and my sense of self-worth. But I managed to finish the degree with perseverance and support from my family and friends and all of that. And then I decided to go study psychology afterwards. I was in a position that I was able to do that. I managed to work part-time. But again, I was seeing my friends like ahead of me in this race, which it really isn't. But I struggled a little bit with, who I was and what was important while I was studying all these psychology modules at an undergraduate level to then eventually begin my academic career in psychology. So I then went on to do honors as I wanted to help people through psychology. And I thought the only way to do that was, sit on the couch, talk to a therapist kind of model for helping people. And ultimately, I ended up going into research and focusing on psychological skills. And that's what we're teaching today. And these are the skills that you can also access through the app that I'm going to give you all the details of. Right. So the skills that we're focusing on today are Big Rocks activity. So this is a self-reflection activity. Then we'll be looking at self-talk. So it is what the name on the bottle says. It's how you talk to yourself. We'll be looking at positive self-talk, negative self-talk, and how you can replace it. And then mental imagery, which is a skill that actually originates in the high-performance athlete space and was sort of popularized by Tiger Woods and some of those professional golfers. All right. Before we go any further, if you have your phone on you, I suggest you whip it out and scan these codes. So as I mentioned earlier, my company makes a psyche mental health app. So this app allows you to measure your well-being and then learn psychological skills like self-talk and imagery, because I can't cover all of them today, but you'll have access to all of them for the next month completely free. All you have to do is input the code tomorrow. It'll give you premium access completely for free. And if you engage with quite a few of the skills, I'll continue to make it free for you just as an incentive. And honestly, there's a whole bunch of really cool resources on there. I don't want to talk too much about it. Go explore it for yourself. And the team at Tomorrow Trust will also send you all those links to access the platform. Again, if you have any questions or comments as we're going, please shoot them through. Right. So part of the app includes an assessment of your well-being. And what's really useful about this well-being assessment is it looks at what we call the determinants of your well-being. So these are essentially the building blocks to a good life. And they are applicable globally across culture, across religion, across gender. And they're things like your physical well-being, which is your ability to sleep and your nutrition and your exercise, and things like your social well-being. So your do you feel a sense of belonging? People understand you? Do you have meaningful relationships? And then there's things like self-mastery and self-worth, which we're covering today a little bit, resilience, emotional intelligence, and your ability to regulate your mood. So really encourage you to go check it out. It'll give you so much insight into yourself, and it can also then show you which skills that the app covers would be really helpful for you. If you decide you don't want to do any of the stuff on the app, don't worry. But I really encourage you to do the assessment, because it might show you, oh, these are areas I can work on, and you might go watch a YouTube video or try other resources. I don't mind in the slightest. And the other thing that's really important about the sort of self-assessment is it creates a roadmap for where to go next. And by that I mean, and as we move into the self-reflection aspect of this talk, it's how do you know where you're going if you don't know where you are? So my first question to all of you is to ask, what is self-reflection? So I'd love to hear or see your comments. When I say, what is self-reflection? What does self-reflection mean to you? While you're having those comments coming through, hopefully they do come through, I'll explain some of the benefits of self-reflection, right? So one of the key benefits is putting aside time to actually slow down. And by slowing down, I mean creating space for deep reflection, because the deep reflection enhances memory and memory consolidation, and creates experiences that feel more meaningful, and time feels richer. So this is something I also struggle with. I tend to race through life. I'm not taking the time to think about where I am, where I'm going. It's just work, 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 work. And the danger with that is that you miss the trees for the forest kind of thing. And you kind of overly focused on this one thing that feels super important right now, but you haven't zoomed out to get the bigger picture. And that energy and effort, maybe you're putting it in the wrong place. Maybe you're putting it in the wrong relationship, or the wrong area of studies, or the wrong sport, or whatever, and maybe that energy and effort and time and space can be spent better elsewhere. So that's one of the key benefits. It also breaks automatic thought loops. So it helps to interrupt unhelpful thoughts, as it allows you to reflect on these unhelpful thoughts. So what our brains often do is they get caught in negative cyclical thinking. So that basically means thoughts that kind of spiral down, right? So you might, as an example, have a bad exam or a bad test, and you start with this thought of, I'm not good enough, and you carry that, and you go into the next test and you're telling yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And then you do badly in that next test, and you think, oh, well, I'm not very smart. Maybe I'm not smart enough to be doing what I'm doing. And then you carry that into the next test, and you also don't do so well because you're berating yourself. And then it's, oh, I can't hack it. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. So you can see it kind of like spirals down. You can also spiral upwards, which is what positive self-talk is all about. And I'll talk more about that later. So I see some of the comments coming through here. What is self-reflection? Insights from thinking about the past and introspection on oneself, 100%. So self-reflection is about looking at the past, but it is also looking at the present and potentially what your future is, right? Because it's good to review what worked, maybe what didn't work, and learn from it. But it also gives you the space to think about, well, where do I actually want to go, right? Because you're going to move forward in space and time anyway. If you don't have a sort of plan or idea of where you want to be, you'll just end up anywhere, right? How do we then self-reflect without necessarily looking down on ourselves? How can we reflect truthfully? That is a great question, and I will answer some of that with some of the content that we're going through. Please keep bringing the comments through. I'm absolutely loving them. Okay, so another thing is it helps reduce emotional reactivity. So what does that mean? The brain loves structure and is less likely to overact if we have structure and we're able to process some of the emotions that we're going through. So we become more emotionally stable. So what I mean by that is we go less from automatic reacting all the time to a space where things aren't as automatic, right? And I find that my behaviors and my thoughts and my emotions become very automatic and almost triggered when I'm super tired or stressed. As an example, I might snap at people over small things, and then afterwards I'm like, oh, I overreacted, I'm being silly. And we often catch ourselves, sometimes we don't, but sometimes we do. We catch ourselves doing it with certain people or certain situations. So for example, you might have a bad relationship with a parent or a sibling or somebody at school or whatever. And every time you see them, you find yourself getting annoyed or frustrated or whatever. And self-reflection gives you the ability to look at these relationships, these environments, these triggers, and say, you know, what is it about this person? What is it about this place that's causing me to respond in this way? Which can help you do what we call emotional fire drills. So you can sort of practice how you would want to respond or how you would want to behave. And sometimes self-reflection can actually tell you, hey, this person isn't good for me. I need space from this. I'm not going to put myself in these situations, because sometimes avoidance is the right decision, right? I have another comment here. Yes, because the majority of the time, negative thoughts are so automatic and subconscious. Exactly. So many of them are automatic. We got them from how we were raised. We got them from how we were taught. We got them from environments. And when we were a kid, we honestly just absorb stuff all the time. But the reality is, in the same way that it was learned, often unintentionally, you can unlearn them and replace them with new learned ones. So that's the real positive thing about it. Another comment coming through, I think that even though we should reflect on the things that are negative things for growth, we should also recognize the good things as well and pat ourselves on the back. 100%, I couldn't agree more. Right. So one key skill that I like to teach everybody that's made such a big difference in my life is the big rocks activity, right? So the big rocks activity is about taking a moment to think about your thoughts, feelings, and actions, but through a really structured approach. So if you've heard of this activity before, that's awesome. You can provide more detailed insights into it in the comments or ask more detailed questions. I'd love that. So what the Big Rocks activity encourages you to do is to think of your life as a jar, right? Now, this jar, which is your life, you want to fill. And you want to fill the jar with everything that's important, right? Obviously, you don't want to fill it with unimportant things. So the important things in your life, the big things, we call those the big rocks. And then we have the less important things, we can call those pebbles. And then we have the very important things, the sand. Now, if you took your life, your jar, you could very easily fill it with sand. The whole thing full to the brim with sand, right? And those unimportant things will be things that a week from now, definitely a year from now, you won't even remember. It'll be the things that you waste your time on that, and sometimes they're just daily things. Like you have to brush your teeth, right, every day. That's kind of sand. Like you got to do it, but it doesn't bring much joy unless you're into dentistry. That's a whole nother thing. right? And then the rocks are the smaller things that you do on a sort of regular basis. The things like some of your hobbies and sports you might play. And then the big rocks are the really fundamental things that are super important that you really do want to prioritize, right? And this activity is really helpful because it sort of puts up a mirror to yourself and your life. Because we often say we know what's important in our lives, but there can often be misalignment, right? We can be focusing on the wrong things. So I'd love for you guys to put in the comments some of the things that you consider big rocks. So what are the things that are really important? So you can just say like my big rocks and then say what they are. And you can also say what your pebbles are. So the things that are important, but not as important as the big rocks, are things that you regularly try to make time for and make space for. And then the sand. So what are the things that are just takes up your time, really isn't that important, and at the end of the day, you could kind of do without. So for me, some of the things that are big rocks are things, or some of the things that fill my jar is something like YouTube, right? I spend more time on YouTube than I'd care to admit. I also do volunteering. I work at Psyche Innovations, which is my company. I'm involved with my family and with my friends. I go to the gym. I enjoy watching movies, right? Oopsie, went too far. So these are just some of the things that fill my jar, right? Now, the problem with not categorizing them as being important or trivial means that they can be given equal ranking, equal importance, right? And for example, family is a really big thing for me. I want to have kids. I want to get married. I want to live a long life with a partner, right? Now, watching YouTube, if that was taken out of my life, I'd be fine. Like, it's not a super key thing. Yes, I use it to sometimes learn new skills or have a good laugh through shorts or whatever. So for me, YouTube is more sand, sometimes even a pebble, or sort of like intermediary thing. So I see here one of the comments is my big rocks is studying, family, friends, and TikTok. Interesting. So when you say TikTok, for me, the question is, why is it a big rock? You know, do you want to become a TikTok influencer? Do you use it to learn a lot of skills? Or is it purely just entertainment? Is it something that you're just doing for fun? And if that's a big rock, that's cool. You know, if you're putting a lot of time towards it and you get a lot of value out of it and you get a lot of return of investment from it, then that makes sense. But if it's something that isn't that important, then, and you're spending way too much time on it and it's not bringing you joy or moving you closer to what you want to achieve, then maybe one should question if it is a big rock or should be a big rock, right? So if you want to be a TikTok influencer, it makes complete sense, right? Or when you're into fashion, or you know, it supplements when you're studying or whatever, then that completely makes sense. So that's also a key thing about this, is that your big rocks don't have to make sense to other people. They only have to make sense to you, right? And even what we mean when we say family can mean different things to different people, right? So family might mean getting married, having 2.5 kids, as the joke goes. And to other people, it might mean not getting married and adopting, or it might mean, you know, traveling the world and settling down much later. Or family might not, or family might be just spending time with your parents, and you know, maybe you're not into having romantic relationships or whatever. That's fine. Figuring out what that is super important. Now, what am I trying to say with this slide here is once you've identified what your big rocks are, so, like what the 5 big things are, what the 5 smaller pebble things are, and what the 5 sand things are, you can start to think how much time and effort is going into these things, right? Because if you say, oh, Daniel, for me, so we got your big rocks: studying, religion, tutoring, and family, right? So if you say to me, studying is a big rock, but then you're spending 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week, and you put it right at the end of the day when you're super tired, maybe it's not. Because if you're telling me at the same time I'm spending 3 hours a day on average on TikTok just doom scrolling or watching TV series that aren't that important to me, then there might be a misalignment, right? You want the scale to be tipped that most of your time, effort, and energy goes towards the big rocks, and as little as possible goes towards the sand, as opposed to having the sand being the big thing, right? So I did a webinar on this a year and a bit ago, and one of my good friends, he moved to the UK, and he watched it, and he phoned me afterwards, and he said, Daniel, it was quite tough to actually do this activity, because I wasn't sure what my big rocks were, so that required a lot of thinking. And B, I started to realize, damn, I'm actually not prioritizing my big rocks. I say, and this is also what my mentor challenged me with, said, Daniel, you say family is a big rock, but what does that actually mean? What do you actually want? Because if it's, oh yeah, I think I want to get married and I think I want to have kids, that was kind of the vague general answer I gave him. And this was a few years ago. And then he said to me, okay, well, do you have a partner? How's that going? And I said to him, well, I actually haven't been on a date in a long time. I haven't been looking to find the right person. And he called me out. He's like, well, if you're saying it's a big rock, why aren't you putting time and effort towards this thing? So figure out what it is that's important, and then put the required energy, time, and effort towards that thing. See some other big rocks coming through here: studying, self-care, music and cleaning. Absolutely love that. I got a big rocks here: school, TV series, and doom scrolling with a sad face. Just got some good insights coming from this activity. Love to see that. All right. So this is a tough activity. I really encourage you to sort of get a piece of paper. You can do it on the app if you want. It's a cool way to do it. And you can have as many big rocks, small rocks, as whatever you like. And you can also even sort of rank them if that's helpful, right? You can say, well, what are the top things? Because, and this also goes into prioritization of time. When people say, I don't have the time for this, right? A lot of what they're actually communicating is they're saying this isn't a priority, right? Because if you were bleeding, like you cut your arm and you were bleeding out, like you were in danger, everything else would be dropped, right? Your studies, whatever. You'd rush to the hospital to get that sorted, right? You find the time. That's a drastic example, but it illustrates that if something really is important for that, if it really is a priority, you find the time. And so that's something that we have to be wary of. And it's difficult to, if you identify, hey, I've been spending like 10, 20 hours a week on something that isn't serving me, you're not going to just like drop it and completely replace it. It can take time to make those changes, but identifying them is obviously the first step on that journey. I just want to make sure that I answered that question earlier. Should go through these things, parasites on the back. How do we reflect truthfully? So that question was, how do we self-reflect without necessarily looking down on ourselves. How do we reflect truthfully? Right. So this activity requires one to reflect on the things that we really do want, right? So where we are and where we really want to go. So it's less sort of berating yourselves or being self-critical, because it kind of gives you a top-down sort of bird's eye view look at your life. And you can say, okay, well, this is how things lie. How do I remove one or two of the sand things, spend less time in that, and how do I structure putting the big rocks first? Because, for example, you might identify, I want to work on families, it's an easy example. And you might see, well, I actually haven't spoken to my parents or my family or my siblings or my partner meaningfully in a while. So what I can do to prioritize that is schedule something into my diary. And that's something I've done with my partner. So I got some wisdom because I work long hours. I got some wisdom from a mentor of mine. And his advice was to prioritize the people that really matter. So every Friday morning, my partner and I have a coffee together and a walk. And that's a way that I'm prioritizing her and having meaningful conversations about the things that really matter. So sometimes we even sit with a little diary and we plan out like social things, or we talk about difficult topics that we maybe haven't been addressing. So that makes space for those things. And that's what you can also do with this activity. See another comment there. Hi guys, thanks for joining. Big rock studying, relaxing, sleeping, or listening to music and family. Amazing, it's great to see. And what you'll start to notice is a lot of people have similar big rocks. And that's actually a strength, and that we can lean on people to encourage us to engage in big rocks that are really important for us. So for example, exercising. I exercise with a friend of mine and encourages me. So we lean on each other to support each other on this thing that's important to the both of us. Okay, now we're going on to self-talk. So I have another question for all of you, and I'd love to see your comments. How would your friend feel if you spoke to them the way you speak to yourself, right? How would your friend feel if you spoke to them the way you speak to yourself? And when I say speak to yourself, I know some of us do actually speak to ourselves out loud, but a lot of it is internal, right? So are we saying nice things? Are we saying negative things? What are we saying to ourselves, right? So the different types of self-talk, right? So there's positive self-talk. So this is the kind that is encouraging, it's supporting, it's motivating, it's promoting perseverance, it's pushing you to be your best self, right? Then there's the neutral kind. So this is kind of just in the middle, right? It's like, it's okay, right? It's not good, it's not bad. It's more just like a narrator explaining what you're doing, right? And a lot of self-talk is neutral. And then there's the unfortunate kind, the negative kind, right? So I put these on the slide here to represent self-talk thoughts that I might be having during this presentation, right? So a positive self-talk in my head to support myself would be something like, hey, this presentation is going great. Everyone's listening. You know, everyone's engaged. Everyone's enjoying what you have to say. The neutral might be, oof, you're halfway there. You're getting through it. You know, it's not so bad. And the negative self-talk, like if you guys weren't putting in comments and weren't engaging or whatever, the negative self-talk could have looked like, nobody's listening, nobody finds this interesting, nobody's learning anything, this is boring. And that can make you really negative and sort of like spiral down. So just giving some examples. Right, so I asked you, how would a friend feel if you spoke to them the way you speak to yourself? I got here, terrible, exclamation mark. And I got another one here, how to ensure that when you prioritize yourself that you don't become selfish or hyper independent. Sure, that is a good question. So I'll answer that one. It's all about balance, right? And I think in South Africa has a wide range of cultures, some more individualistic, some more communal, where the community and supporting the community is really important. And what you essentially have to try to do is align yourself with the decisions and the vision and goal of things that are beneficial to you, right? So if, for example, career is something that's important to you, you know when you've overcooked it, right? There's working hard in your studies, making sure you are passing, making sure you're showing up to class, making sure you're present and learning opportunities that are just there for you to invest in yourself. And you know when you've started pushing people away, you're starting to overwork and drain yourself, right? And if people are criticizing you or calling you selfish for working on the things that are good for you, your health, your family, the big rocks, the things you know are important, that is a warning sign that people might be a little toxic. So it's really difficult and almost counterintuitive to be selfish investing in yourself, because if you're working hard in your studies or in your relationships, that is a positive effect on everyone around you. Only people who, well, there's a risk that people who don't have good intentions for you might be calling you selfish, because you investing in yourself and prioritizing the things that promote your well-being might not be the best thing for them. So that's something to be wary of. I'm not trying to make too many blanket statements here, but that's something to be wary of. Got some more comments coming here. Very bad, despise. I think my friend's feelings would be hurt sometimes. I've stopped talking to myself. I don't even know myself like that. I don't really feel emotions towards myself. I don't know if it makes sense. So I guess my friend wouldn't feel anything, feel nothing. Offended sometimes, but I also think my friend would feel comfortable and motivated other times. Fair enough. They would feel under constant duress as I'm always pushing myself over my limits. They would also feel hints of love. I love the mixture here. And if I'm honest, I share a lot of the same experiences. Sometimes I'm really positive, I'm really supportive, I'm really kind. And sometimes I'm a little bit of my own worst enemy. Sometimes I push myself too much and my expectations are too high. And there's a psychologist that has this sort of thought experiment that I really enjoy. And the question he poses is, if you were to think of a person that you love, right, and you were to design a day for them that would be in their best interest, how would you design that day, right? You would make sure that they got enough rest, that they ate healthy, that they got exercise, that they got to see their friends, that they, had enough time for studying or work or whatever the thing they're doing in the stage of their life. School age children are, studying, they're not working a job, honestly. You would have balance. And the thought question was then, okay, well, how would you design a day for you? How would you design a week for you? And a lot of people go, oh, well, bugger. I'm not giving myself the same love and care and structure in what I would do for people that I care about. And that's often because we put unrealistic expectations on ourselves, and we think that we should be able to achieve things that are beyond reach, that are unrealistic. And that kind of connects with self-talk as well. We often berate ourselves for unrealistic expectations, or we're overly negative. So it's often helpful to think about, what would I say to a friend who I really care about, or somebody I really love? Or another interesting thought experiment is to think, what would I say to a child version of me, right? So if a little 10-year-old or 9-year-old Daniel was to walk up to me and I was to talk to them, I would pour love on them, right? I would care for them. I'd give them a big hug and support them. I wouldn't be like, well, you didn't do enough emails today, or that you didn't get high enough mark on that thing, and berate them. But we often kind of do that to ourselves, which is, it's good to become aware of that because we can actually catch that and stop it. I've got some more comments coming through here. How do you authentically promote positive self-talk without suppressing the negative? Because to some extent, everything we say to ourselves have some truth in it. I hear that. And another one here is judgment, right? So positive self-talk is really about supporting yourself and encouraging yourself. It's not about being unrealistic and telling yourself, oh, I'm the best, I'm the smartest, I can do anything. That's not really meaningful or realistic self-talk. And I hear you about, the negative can be helpful, but I challenge that, right? There's a difference between criticism and feedback or reviewing what worked well. There's a difference between, oh, you failed that test because you're a lazy piece of poo and you always do this, you never work hard enough, and you're never going to succeed if you don't work hard. That's not really helpful, right? But if you say to yourself, hey, this time didn't go as planned, maybe we didn't study hard enough, let's make a plan for fixing the mistakes we had this time. You can still evaluate the things that didn't go well and talk to yourself in a supportive, kind way. You can at least try to remove or reduce the amount of negative self-talk and turn it more into something positive. Right. So as with all the skills, your self-talk really is your inner dialogue that shapes your thoughts, emotions, and actions. So sometimes that self-talk is that encouragement of, yes, go kiss that person. They're showing you that they love you. They want your love, It's that little bit of courage that pushes you. Or sometimes it's that, it's okay, you're sad. It's okay to be sad. This is a tough time. Feel what you're feeling, right? And sometimes it's just internal thoughts of like ideas and emotions and things that are all sort of swirling together, right? Now, the cool thing about self-talk is that by practicing it actually rewires your brain. So as I said earlier, a lot of self-talk is sort of inherited a little bit from how we were raised. And there's sometimes generational challenges or traumas can be passed on. If you had a parent or even a grandparent that was berated by their parents and they grew up in an environment that was very harsh and always very demeaning and always broke them down, was always super critical, what happened to them as children turned into their self-talk, right? Turned into their beliefs and how they see the world. And if they weren't given opportunities to challenge that way of thinking, what happens when they grow up? They become just like their parents, and then they berate their kids, and they're overly negative, and they can spew ideas and ways of thinking that are unhelpful and were inherited, right? For example, if a parent experienced some sort of injustice to themselves, they might have a negative view on the world. Oh, those people are all bad, or everything in the world is bad, or whatever, and they spew that onto you. It takes a lot of work, but it's super foundational to our well-being to challenge that and try to slowly rewire our brain to be like, their experiences and what happened to them doesn't, and often almost always isn't, true for you, right? So that's one of the super effective things of self-talk. And then there's also its effect in stress management, right? So when stressful times come, if you practice positive self-talk, you're actually more able to self-soothe, so calm yourself down when something overwhelming is happening, as well as promote your sense of self-confidence in dealing with the stressful thing, right? Because the stressful thing can actually be self-directed, right? So if I choose to go make a speech at a wedding, right, like I'm choosing that stress, and that's a good stress. That's a motivating stress. That's a appropriate challenge. And I can encourage myself. I can say, oh, Daniel, you've done speeches before. They went well. You're going to have fun. And if your jokes don't land, it's not the end of the world, right? And then, of course, there's stress that comes from the environment. You know, you don't decide when the exams come, or if there's a random assignment that pops up, or you know, you suddenly get sick or whatever. So self-talk can help you manage those environmental factors as well. And I think something I should have mentioned as well is that the brain is very flexible in how it can be rewired. The neural pathways are very, they call it neuroplastic, which basically means at any age, no matter how old you are, it can be rewired, it can be retrained, it can learn new things, right? If that wasn't true, our parents would never have learned how to use smartphones, and your granny and grandpa would have never learned how to use a TV remote, right? Like you can learn new things. And that's super important. But the danger in that is you can learn negative things, unhelpful things, as well as you can learn positive things. So you've got to put yourself in environments where you can learn positive skills. And then there's the physical effects. By your mental health is so closely linked to your physical health. And if you don't look after how you talk to yourself and your physical well-being, it will have effects on your physical well-being. So I'm curious, and this is another question to all of you, what are examples of positive self-talk? What are the kind of positive things you say to yourself to support yourself, to encourage yourself, to inspire and motivate yourself? Do you have statements that you say to yourself? Are there things that your parents taught you? What does that positive self-talk look like in your lives? While those come through, I'm going to talk about the different ways positive self-talk affects us, right? So one of the cool things about positive self-talk is reminding ourselves of previous wins. So what do I mean by that? Is that there have been circumstances or situations in which things have gone well, right? Going back to my example of doing a speech at a wedding, I have spoken in front of a crowd before, even if it's like friends at a party, you just say a few words and do a toast or whatever. By reminding yourself of the times that it went well, you can encourage yourself in that moment, right? So there was a stage where I went to go do a presentation in front of 1,000 people at a school, and I was super nervous. And what I did to calm myself down is I told myself, Daniel, you've done a speech to 100 people before. Speaking to 1,000 people is no different, right? Like, you can do this. You know you can do this. So that's one of the things we can do. Then there's positive affirmations. These are positive self-statements that we tell ourselves. So for example, we have some coming through here. One day at a time, you'll get there eventually. That's a great example of a positive affirmation, right? Got some other ones coming through here. You make it, you always do. That's another one about perseverance. That's a great positive affirmation. People sometimes say these things. My cousin has a small boy, and she's encouraging him to say a few statements in front of the mirror every day. I think it's super sweet. I can't remember all of them, but it's something like you're strong, you're smart, you're good enough, and you're loved. I think it's those 4 things. To constantly remind himself that he is capable, that he is good enough. I think he's like 5 or 6. So she started really early with it, which is super amazing. What else have we got here? Thank myself for showing up and seeing something through, whether it went good or bad. I love that, the perseverance. Tell myself that it's okay. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Exactly. These are examples of great positive self-talk. So what we can also do is listen to positive audio, right? So these are motivational videos. These can be audio that we record for ourselves. So you can make your own positive self-talk audio that you might play to yourself. I know some athletes that do that. They record themselves talking through something that helps them calm down, or reading something from a book, or what are some of the other examples? Poems. So these are examples of things that you can do that in stressful moments or before some sort of like big competition or whatever. You can listen to these things. And also by listening to some of these audios, you can pick up other ways of learning positive self-talk. And then there's visual cues. So you can also remind yourself with things in your environment to promote positive self-talk, to make it more of a habit. I think it was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Yes, it was. He talked about how he made the habit of every time he walked through a doorway, he had a positive self-talk statement that he said to himself. I can't remember what it was, but I don't know, something like "you're good enough," or "you can do this," or whatever. And I think that's really cool, because you walk through doorways all the time. And it's like you're moving into a new space, you're moving into a new environment, and you're encouraging yourself, you're building yourself up. And making that built into your day, I think, is so valuable. You could put sticky notes up on your mirror. I know people do that as well, and they read it and say it to themselves every morning. And these things might feel a little cheesy, but it's a great way to create the habit. And once you're automatically doing it, it almost feels wrong to break the habit. And I've been lucky enough to have that with exercise. Exercise is something I really love, and it's a way I manage stress as well. Not exercising actually makes me feel stressed. So it's this positive behavior that's so automatic, so part of who I am, that it's hard to break. What else have we got here? Just do it. Nike, or Nike, depending on how you want to say it. Love that. Can listening to uplifting music substitute as positive self-talk when you can't tell yourself the words directly? 100%. Supporting music that makes you feel happy, makes you feel calm, can also be used in a similar way to self-talk, and can also be used for stress management. I find it really weird listening to myself, even on a voice note. 100%. I'm the same. I think I have a super annoying voice, and it's really weird putting myself on the internet with recorded videos. I get that, but it just takes time and practice. Eventually, it starts to feel less cringy or whatever. And the thing I kind of go back to is like, why not? Why not support yourself? Why not be in your corner? Why not say the kind things to yourself that maybe nobody else ever has, right? Give yourself the opportunity to be positive. Right. So self-talk often starts with awareness. So there's another question here that I'd love you guys to answer is, do you have situational triggers? So are there environments or situations or people that trigger negative self-talk for you, right? So it might be every time you see a certain person or whatever, you start to kind of shrink, say nasty things to yourself or whatever. What do those look like? And I encourage you to think about this, because it's not just self-talk. It can be emotions. It can be all sorts of things that are triggered by certain situations. And knowing what these are can help create techniques or habits to either avoid them, if that's what's necessary, or ways to manage them, right? So, for example, I noticed that I was sometimes a little negative or had a little negative self-talk when I hung out with some of my friends, right? And it's because guys can be a little bit, we make jokes and we kind of tear each other down a little bit. And I noticed that I've become a little bit anxious around certain people. And that was really helpful for me because I started to realize that, hey, this negative self-talk is coming from the environment, is coming from these people who are not really supportive of me. So I got rid of some of the friends that weren't good for me. And the friends that were good for me, I challenged them as much as I challenged myself to actually have a culture where we supported each other. So we're on a WhatsApp group. It's called the Gentlemen. I don't know why. None of us are gentlemen. Negative self-talk. We're all gentlemen. And I encouraged us all to actually celebrate each other. When you have good news, post it in the group so we can celebrate. You know, like, let's bring positivity and kindness to each other's lives. And even when some people hear that, they're like, oh, that feels so weird to say that. And it's like, but why? It shouldn't be weird. It should be normal to support each other and your friends, right? So awareness is super important. Where are you getting triggered? What is causing you to have negative self-talk? Is it a parent? Is it a colleague or whatever? And how do you feel? So awareness is the key, right? And remember, something really important here is that self-talk is not you, right? You are not your thoughts. They're a part of you. And self-talk is often untrue, especially the negative self-talk. And it can be changed, right? And by becoming aware of some of these triggers, we can more proactively promote our well-being. We've got a comment coming through here. This might be stupid, but people asking me very obvious questions makes me so irritated and dismissive to a point where I wonder if I'm too intolerant towards others and if I should spend more time alone. This is one of my triggers. That's very interesting insight. And I really encourage you to, you're sort of noticing the top of the iceberg, right? You're getting frustrated with people around questions. And I challenge you to think about the real depth. Why? What is it about the people or the questions? You know, like, why are you getting upset? And what might change look like, right? How would you want to change it? How would you want to interact with people? How would you want to people to respond to you if they experience something similar? And able to copy the link for attendance. Okay, well, I don't know what I can do about that. All right. Now we're going to do a self-talk activity that's called negative thought stoppage. So this is a really useful skill to interrupt self-talk that is not good for you, so negative self-talk. So the first part is to identify it, right? To notice when you're doing negative self-talk. And then to visualize some sort of stop sign. So it can be stop, it can be halt, it can be go away, it can be whatever you'd like. But saying it in your head can be really helpful to interrupt that negative self-talk. Then there's questioning it, you know, and this really helps to dismantle negative self-talk. We ask ourselves, is the self-talk actually true, right? Is it helpful? Is it true? Is it based on evidence? And 99.9% of the time, it isn't, right? We're telling ourselves things that are just not based on reality, saying, oh, you're not good enough. But what's the evidence that you're not good enough, right? Oh, you failed the test. Does that really mean you're not good enough? Or does it mean that you maybe didn't study enough, or that you were unlucky and that there was a lot of other stresses going on in your life? So is it true? And then reframe it. How can you change the way you're thinking about this to replace it with positive self-talk, right? So instead of, oh, I'm not smart enough, you say, stop. Is it true? No, I just didn't do so well on the test, right? So it's actually not true. Reframe it, so, or replace it, right? So, ooh, maybe I just didn't work hard enough. So maybe the positive self-talk can be like, I'm going to work harder in the future, or I know my worth, and I know that if I put my energy towards something that I can reap the rewards. That's a bit wordy, but you can find a way to kind of turn it into something that promotes your well-being and promotes your sense of self-worth, even if it's something that was negative, right? And similarly, you can actually promote positive self-talk. And what you might start to notice as you move through the world is that you can interpret events as negative, neutral, or positive. And as an example, if I'm doing a presentation, right, in person, and somebody laughs, like they point and laugh, right? A negative sort of assumption would be like, oh, they're laughing at me. They think I'm a joke, right? Neutral might be, oh, something funny might have just happened maybe behind me, or, you know, something else is happening, right? Or positive might be like, oh, they're really enjoying what I'm saying. Like they're having a great time. They're pointing and be like, wow, this dude's hilarious, right? So you can interpret the exact same thing through a different lens. And that's what I also want to challenge you to think about as well, is how much of what's happening in your life are you seeing through a negative lens, through a neutral lens, and through a positive lens? And I always say, look for the evidence. What makes it actually true? You know, if I actually went up and asked the person, hey, why are you laughing? And they said, well, I think you're a joke. Well, then obviously that's negative. You know, you have evidence and be like, okay, well, then you're just not a very nice person, right? Or they might say, oh, you're actually genuinely hilarious. I thought you're really funny. Then you've got the evidence to prove that your interpretation of the world and the events are actually aligned. So the same is true for self-talk and how we deal with negative self-talk. Look for the evidence, try to reframe it, and find the positive element that can come from it. Okay, we're going into our last skill here, which is mental imagery. So what does your best future self look like? If you have to imagine where you want to be in 6 months or a year or 5 years or 10 years, what does that version of yourself look like? Do you have no idea? Do you have a vague idea? Have you got a ballpark idea? Or have you got a very clear idea of who you want to be, where you want to be, especially if it's aligned with your big rocks? Can you say, in 5 years from now, I'm going to have 2 kids, I'm going to have a dog. Success to me looks like having enough money each month to go eat a meal out and spend quality time with my friends and family and not be stressed. What does this best future self look like? And that's part of self-mastery as well, is to start to think about where you want to go, which kind of ties into the self-reflection activity in the big rocks. Now, who uses mental imagery? And I'll talk more about what mental imagery is now. So mental imagery is really used by a wide range of people. So it's used by athletes to improve their performances, to practice skills and activities. It's used by celebrities to either calm themselves down when they're going on stage to do a rock show or a performance in front of 100,000 people. And it's also used by religious people or everyday people. So there's an interesting case study of Tibetan monks, and they've been practicing imagery for a really long time. And what they're actually able to do is, in the middle of Tibetan winter, they're in like a little wood hut and there's snow everywhere. It's like minus 20 degrees, so it's freezing cold. They're just in like little shorts. They cover themselves in a wet blanket. And what they do with the power of their mind is they imagine themselves not being in pain, being comfortable, being warm, being in control. And what they can do is they can actually upregulate, so increase their body's metabolic rate and the amount of heat they produce. So obviously it takes a long time to practice to be able to do this. But so much so that steam starts to rise off them. And the water in the blanket starts to evaporate in the middle of freezing cold winter, which would otherwise kill a normal person, or certainly me. And that's what mental imagery has the power to do, is it has the power to create mental practices based on visualization and using all the mind's senses. So something that's really important here is the difference between mental imagery and dreaming. So dreaming is sort of something that happens automatic while you're sleeping, and mental imagery is an intentional practice, and it's practicing it for real. There is an attendance, so all of you who sort of signed in using the link, I have your emails, so don't worry, I got some of your attendance there. If that's helpful, I see it's coming through in the comments. And what it helps you do is to actually practice things ahead of time. So it can be used for emotional fire drills. So for example, practicing really difficult things, like asking somebody on a date, or asking somebody for an apology for something that you did wrong, or practicing asking a boss for a raise. These are things that you can do through mental imagery. So you imagine, how you would be in space, how you would talk, how you would move, what are the things you would say, how would you hold your body. These are the kind of aspects that we think about when we talk about mental imagery. So through practice, it helps you make better decisions under pressure, and it also helps you learn better and faster. So mental imagery actually comes from elite athletes in terms of more recent literature. It's been practiced by religious groups and whatever around the world for literally hundreds and hundreds of years. But as it's come into the psychological science, it comes from sports science. And elite athletes use it all the time. And you might wonder, well, why? And the reason is because their bodies can only physically train a certain number of hours in a week, right? Your body just gets tired. And mental imagery allows them to practice. You might have seen rugby players or football players do sort of a little practice or a certain movement, getting themselves in the right frame of mind before they kick a penalty or go for the goals or whatever. Mental imagery is sort of similar in that way. So professional golfers often practice the swings in their head, focusing on all the key attributes of a performance when they're sitting on a plane or on a bus or at home. So it's all about these sort of like short practice sessions. And by practicing at home many times, they can do something mentally that they otherwise in the past could have only done physically in the real world. So they manage to get in a whole lot more practice sessions and reduce performance anxiety than people who don't practice it. It might sound weird, but it really does work. So how do you do mental imagery? So if we go back to the idea of the question I asked of what does your best future self look like, or you could use the example of how would you want to present, you bring in all the senses. So you think about how will you look, how will you dress? So am I going to wear a shirt in the future when I do this presentation? How do I want to move? Am I going to move my arms? And am I going to make sure that I make points clearly and use my hand? Am I make sure that how do I speak? Am I speaking really softly so nobody can hear me? Or am I, accentuating my voice? Am I pausing at the right times, right? Feel can be how you're moving in the space, if you're greeting somebody, how are you shaking their hand? These are all the things you can think about and practice through mental imagery. Smell can also be appropriate. So professional swimmers, they often think about the smell of chlorine because it's such a distinctive smell when they're trying to think about getting into a practice mode and practicing strokes or movements. I see a comment here. Think about my best future self as a professional engineer who takes care of their health, has a better relationship with God, and makes enough money to treat the people she loves and herself included. I love that. I see myself as a wife, a woman of God, and an engineer that has or always tries to practice balance, and a balanced life with a comfortable income. I love that. I love that you're thinking about who you want to be, where you want to go, and that's the self-reflection. And then what's also awesome is you could start bringing in mental imagery. You can start saying, okay, well, what are the aspects of my life I want to practice? Who do I want to be? So it's the visualization, and then it's the intentional mental practices around these kind of key facets or skills. And what's really crazy is the evidence around mental imagery is insane. Your brain really can't distinguish between what is real and what is imaginary. When you're dreaming, your brain doesn't know that you're dreaming. So you can actually practice enough so that your mental imagery is literally just as real. So the evidence is very clear. It improves performance. It actually promotes healing. So they took people who were suffered breaks in their bones, and they asked them to visualize, use mental imagery, imagining that their bones were fusing together quicker and that their bodies were healing quicker. And then in the studies, they found that the people who did that routinely healed significantly faster than the people who didn't do that. Another cool example is they took people who were elite power lifters, and they told them that the weight that they were lifting was their maximum weight, right? So if you think about lifting heavy things, you think, oh, 100 kgs is 100 kgs, right? You either can move it or you can't. And the reality was that they told these professional Olympic weightlifters that it was their maximum weight. And they put weights on the side that actually had the numbers changed. And it was actually a 10% increase in their known and perceived maximum weight. And everyone in the study was able to push 10% more, which is insane when you think about their physical limitations. They really believed that this was the most that they could push. And because they told themselves, I can do this, they did it. So these are just physical examples, which are easy to kind of understand, but mental imagery can work the same way in preparing for presentations or other skills. So the key things you want to do is do short practices. Imagery practices do not need to be long. 5 minutes is sufficient. You want to engage as many of your senses as possible. So for example, if you're doing imagery practices of presentation, so what I like to do is to alternate between physically doing or swap between physically doing the thing and then mentally doing the thing. So for example, because I have to do a lot of presentations, I guess, using this example, I'll practice, how am I speaking, saying the words, how am I moving? And then I kind of go into my head and think about, okay, well, how was I actually moving? How did I actually sound? Okay, let's focus on one aspect of it, the movement. Do I want to pace? Am I pacing? Is my movement jerky and awkward? What would improvement look like there? So then I think about it, like, oh, okay, deliberate intentional movements that explain points rather than distract. That's what I want to work on. So then I'll practice in the real world and be like, okay, well, this is how I would move. And I can keep going back and forth and practicing. So bring in all the senses. It's kind of like recording yourself to review how you're doing or any skills that you're trying to learn, but even more detailed than reviewing or recording yourself. And most of the time, most of us don't record ourselves learning any skill or practicing anything, whether it's sport or communication or self-talk or anything you want to improve. And another key thing is about focusing on improvements. So there's a famous example of a South African rugby coach that took over the Springboks, and what he did was he recorded them playing, and then he put up on a big screen on a projector and showed each of the players, this is when you made this mistake, this is when you made that mistake, this is when you dropped the ball, this is when you didn't kick well. So all they did was had a very detailed analysis of all the things that they didn't do well. Next time they played, the number of mistakes they made drastically increased. Why? Because they had been shown all the times they'd made the mistake and they had that in their head. And mental imagery and practices all need to be positively framed. If the coach had recorded them and said, this is when you passed really well, this is how you passed well, this is what made it effective, this is how I want you to do it again in the future, those kind of intentional practices promote your mental health and your functioning far better than the overly critical negative ones. Then with anything, it's practice, right? Whether it's self-talk, self-reflection you can do through journaling, or you can do the activity I suggested. There's many different types of self-reflection activities you can do. But it's the intentional practice over multiple periods of time, right? If you think about training a muscle to get stronger, you can't go to the gym once, lift all the heaviest weights you can find, and think, oh, I'm buff now. Like, obviously, that's not how it works, right? It's how often you do it, how intentional you are when you do it, how well you practice it. And this is an example from a famous violin player. Somebody asked him, because there's that 10,000 hour rule, right? Like, you can master anything with 10,000 hours. And he challenged it and he said, no, that's not true. There's a difference between somebody practicing the violin for 3 hours a day, not really caring, not really being intentional, not really giving it all of their focus, and somebody who does 30 minutes of high intensity, really focused learning, right? And the same is true for studying. If you're studying and you're sitting on your phone and you're scrolling and then, oh, I'll study a little bit more, and then you're back to scrolling and you're messaging people on WhatsApp and whatever, that practice is not very intentional. It's not very focused. And that's true across, this is a psychological law, pretty much. Positive, focused practices over a long period of time create the largest positive effect. And that's true for mental health, that's true for physical health. So one of the key kind of things is that the image is a little bit cheesy. I get that. But you really have the capacity to sculpt a mentality and a mental health and mental well-being that represents who you want to be, right? Most of life, especially when we're kids, we inherit a lot of the ways of thinking and behaviors and sense of self-worth that we might not actually want, right? Like, you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you're not your behaviors. You're all of these things wrapped together, and you can constantly work to change and develop them further. But it takes time. It takes being honest with yourself, self-reflecting on where you are, how things are going. It requires looking at your self-talk. How are you promoting yourself? Are you prioritizing positive things that encourage you and build you up? And are you thinking about and projecting with imagery or visualization where you want to be, what that future looks like, and are you slowly moving towards it? And giving yourself grace, appreciating that change takes time, that nobody goes from nothing to zero to hero overnight, right? It's a continual process. And these skills really have been transformational in my life. I remember being taught, as another example of a psychological skill that we teach, goal setting in high school. And I was like, oh, goal setting's pretty lame. But it's a tool, much like a hammer or a chisel or whatever. If it just sits in a toolbox and you never use it, it's not helpful. And I rediscovered goal setting when I was in my mid-20s. And honestly, just applying one skill, if you take one of the skills I've taught you today and you meaningfully apply it, it can really change your life. And I set goals on the big rocks. And honestly, I was a very unhappy student. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I wanted with my life. I'm not the smartest guy, I'm not the hardest working guy, but I started getting really laser focused on the things that were important and getting rid of all the junk, all the sand stuff in my life. And you guys can do that too. And even more so, I think one of the most powerful things about this is the positive influence you can have in other people's lives. You can be a mentor, you can be a teacher, you can be a mother or a father or an uncle or an aunt or a brother or a sister that shares knowledge and skills and brings positive impact to the people's lives around you. And that starts with how you treat yourself, your psychological skills, all these tools you have in your toolbox, so you can bring them out at the right time to sort of promote your well-being. So as I said, there's lots of skills you can learn. I really do encourage you to check out the app, even if it's just a starting point for you to realize, wow, there's all these skills I can learn. For example, anger management is another one. Everybody gets angry. How do you experience your anger? How do you manage your anger? What makes you angry? What do you do when you're angry? Because you might think, oh, well, you know, like I go to the gym and I punch a boxing bag, you know, when I'm angry. It's like, well, cool. That's not a bad idea. But if you're at a nursery school and there's a whole bunch of small children and you don't have a boxing bag and these kids annoy you, you know, you can't rely on that one thing. You can't rely on, oh, I want to hit something, you know. And that's what you want to do, is you want to develop this like toolbox of skills that you can apply in any setting. Right. So I really encourage you to follow us on social media, LinkedIn. We often have internships. If that's something that might interest you. And people also volunteer to make an impact in the communities we work in. We also post lots of cool videos and stuff on our social media that teach psychological skills. And feel free to email me or check out our website to learn more about some of the trainings we do. It's been an absolute pleasure presenting to all of you. I hope you learned lots. And if you have any questions or things you wanted to ask, but you didn't feel too comfortable asking me here in the comments, feel free to email me. So it's just daniel@psycheinnovations.com, and myself or somebody from my team will reach out and hopefully answer all those questions. See the comment coming through here. Thank you. This was such a good session. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's been an absolute pleasure. And as I said, please do reach out. Chat soon. Bye for now.